Hello, everybody. Welcome back to 5G Into the Abyss. Apologies for what might have been a microphone snafu. I'm talking very low today because I have a sleeping child nearby. But what better to do near a sleeping child than to read literature that allows you to navigate the abyss in an empowered and fulfilling way, where uncertainty and mystery mix with excitement and possibility, building our confidence on the grounds of the words of great writers before us. So I continue with Czeslaw Milosz, or Czeslaw Milosz's The Captive Mind. We're going to pick up in the second half of the chapter called Ketman. That's chapter 3 in The Captive Mind, published by Vintage International and translated by Jane Ziałonko. This is Czeslaw Milosz, the Nobel Prize-winning Polish writer and past UC Berkeley professor. Ketman. Pick up with metaphysical Ketman. Metaphysical Ketman occurs generally in countries with a Catholic past. Most examples of it within the Imperium are found in Poland. This Ketman depends on a suspended belief in a metaphysical principle of the world. A man attached to this Ketman regards the epoch in which he lives as anti-metaphysical, and hence as one in which no metaphysical faith can emerge. Humanity is learning to think in rationalistic and materialistic categories. It is burdened with immediate problems and entangled in a class war. Otherworldly religions are crumbling, living through a period of crisis and, what is worse, serving to defend the obsolete order. This does not mean that mankind will not return to a better and purified religion in the future. Perhaps the new faith is an indispensable purgatory. Perhaps God's purpose is being accomplished through the barbarians, i.e. the center, who are forcing the masses to awaken out of their lethargy. The spiritual fare these masses receive from the new faith is inferior and insufficient. Still, one must commend the center for breaking new ground and for demolishing externally splendid, but internally rotten facades. One should cooperate in this task without betraying one's attachment to the mystery. All the more so because the mystery has no possibility of appearing in literature, for example, and because neither the language nor the ideas at the disposal of contemporary man are ripe enough to express it. This metaphysical Ketman, in its turn, has a number of varieties. Certain practicing Catholics serve even in the security police and suspend their Catholicism in executing their inhumane work. Others, trying to maintain a Christian community in the bosom of the new faith, come out publicly as Catholics. They often succeed in preserving Catholic institutions because the dialecticians are ready to accept so-called progressive and patriotic Catholics who comply in political matters. The mutual game is rather ambiguous. The rulers tolerate such Catholics as a temporary and necessary evil, reasoning that the stage has not yet arrived at which one can utterly wipe out religion, and that it is better to deal with accommodating bigots than with refractory ones. Progressive Catholics are, however, conscious of being relegated to a not particularly honorable place, that of shamans or witch doctors from savage tribes whom one humors until one can dress them in trousers and send them to school. They appear in various state spectacles and are even sent abroad as shining testimonials to the center's tolerance toward uncivilized races. One can compare their function to that of noble savages imported to the metropolis by colonial powers for state occasions. Their defense against total degradation is metaphysical Ketman. They swindle the devil who thinks he's swindling them, but the devil knows what they think and is satisfied. What holds for Catholics can be applied to members of other religions, as well as to persons outside any denomination. One of the most ominous reproaches leveled against writers is the suspicion that their verses, plays, or novels contain a metaphysical residue. Since a writer is a civilizer who dares not be a shaman or a sorcerer, the slightest signs of a metaphysical tendency in him are unforgivable. The literature of the countries which, until the Second World War, were free from Moscow's domination betrayed especially strong inclinations in that direction, so that metaphysical deviation is of constant and imperative concern to the rulers. For instance, a play that introduces strangeness, revealing the author's interest in the tragedy of life, has no chance of being produced, because the tragedy of human fate leads to thoughts about the mystery of human destiny. One forgives certain writers like Shakespeare these predispositions, but there is no question of permitting any contemporary author to harbor them. It is for this reason that Greek tragedies are not deemed suitable for theater repertories. Marx loved the Greek tragedians, but let us not forget that the connection between the new faith and Marx is rather superficial. The new faith is a Russian creation, and the Russian intelligentsia which shaped it had developed the deepest contempt for all art that does not serve social ends directly. Other social functions of art, probably the most important ones, consistently escaped its understanding. As for poetry, since its sources are hard to differentiate from the sources of all religion, it is singularly exposed to persecution. True, the poet is free to describe hills, trees, and flowers, but if he should feel that boundless exultation in the face of nature that seized Wordsworth on his visit to Tintern Abbey, he is at once suspect. This is an excellent means of eliminating the legions of bad poets who like to confess their pantheistic flights publicly. But it is also a means of exterminating poetry as a whole and replacing it by jingles little better than the singing commercials broadcast over the radio in America. A painter, in turn, may be attacked quite as easily for using abbreviated and synthesized forms, formalism, as for an excessive love of the beauty of the world, i.e. a contemplative attitude which signifies that he is a metaphysicist by temperament. A musician should see to it that his compositions are easy to translate into the language of common activities, enthusiasm for work, folk festivals, etc., and that no element remains which is difficult to grasp and hence dangerous. If metaphysical Ketman is tolerated in the savages, i.e. those who profess the Christian religion, in the artists who are considered the educators of society, it is severely punished. Ethical Ketman results from the opposition to the ethics of the new faith, which is based on the principle that good and evil are definable solely in terms of service or harm to the interests of the revolution. Since exemplary behavior of citizens in their interrelations aids the cause of socialism, great emphasis is placed upon individual morality. The development of a new man is the key point in the new faith's program. Demands made upon party members are exceedingly harsh. One exacts of them no small degree of abstinence. As a result, admission to the party is not unlike entrance into a religious order, and the literature of the new faith treats this act with a gravity equal to that with which Catholic literature speaks of the vows of young nuns. The higher one stands in the party hierarchy, the more attentively is one's private life supervised. Love of money, drunkenness, or a confused love life disqualify a party member from holding important offices. Hence, the upper brackets of the party are filled by ascetics devoted to the single cause of the revolution. As for certain human tools deprived of real influence but useful because of their names, even if they belong to the party, one tolerates or sometimes encourages their weaknesses, for they constitute a guarantee of obedience. The general ethical ideal of the new faith is puritanical. If it were feasible to lodge all the citizens in cells and release them only for work or for political meetings, that would undoubtedly be most desirable. But alas, one must make concessions to human nature. Procreation is possible only as a result of sexual relations between men and women, and one must take this inconvenience into account. The new man is conditioned to acknowledge the good of the whole as the sole norm of his behavior. He thinks and reacts like others. Is modest, industrious, satisfied with what the state gives him, limits his private life to nights spent at home, and passes all the rest of his time amidst his companions at work or at play, observing them carefully and reporting their actions and opinions to the authorities. Informing was and is known in many civilizations, but the new faith declares it a cardinal virtue of the good citizen, though the name itself is carefully avoided. It is the basis of each man's fear of his fellow men. Work in an office or factory is hard, not only because of the amount of labor required, but even more because of the need to be on guard against omnipresent and vigilant eyes and ears. After work, one goes to political meetings or special lectures, thus lengthening a day that is without a moment of relaxation or spontaneity. The people one talks with may seem relaxed and careless, sympathetic and indignant, but they appear so. But if they appear so, it is only to arouse corresponding attitudes and to extract confidences which they can report to their superiors. In effect, this cult of the community produces something which poisons the community itself. The mentality of the party's sages is, indeed, rather strange. They make concessions to physiological human weaknesses, but they refuse to admit that man has other foibles as well, that he feels fine when he can relax and unhappy when he is afraid, that lying is bad for him because it creates internal tension. These weaknesses, together with others like the desire to better one's own lot at the expense of others, at the expense of one's fellow men, transform the ethic which was originally founded on cooperation and brotherhood into an ethic of a war pitting all men against all others and granting the greatest chances of survival to the craftiest. Victory in this new struggle seems to belong to a breed different from that which was favored to win in the battle for money in the early days of industrial capitalism. If biting dogs can be divided into two main categories, noisy and brutal, or silent and slyly vicious, then the second variety would seem most privileged in the countries of the new faith. 40 or 50 years of education in these new ethical maxims must create a new and irretrievable species of mankind. The new man is not merely a postulate, he is beginning to become a reality. Ethical Ketman is not rare among highly placed figures in the party. These persons, no matter how capable they are of murdering millions of people in the name of communism, try to compensate for their professional severity and are often more honorable in their personal relations than people who affect individualistic ethics. Their capacity to sympathize and help is almost unlimited. Indeed, this very feeling of compassion pushed them onto the road of revolution in their youth, and in this they reiterated the experience of Marx himself. One finds this Ketman chiefly among the old communists. Conflicts between friends and the interests of the revolution are matters they weigh at length in their conscience, and they are pitiless only when completely convinced that in shielding a friend or in refraining from denouncing them, they are injuring that cause which is most precious to them. Though they are usually esteemed as people of crystalline righteousness, they are not safe from frequent accusations of intellectuality, a contemptuous epithet for those who are blameless as theoreticians, but hampered in action by an oversensitivity to ethical considerations. A revolutionary should be without scruples. It is better to cut down human trees blindly than to wonder which among them are really rotten. This variety of Ketman is one of the most prevalent in the people's democracies because the new ethic is of recent inculcation, whereas the ethic vanquished by the new faith was ensconced there for centuries. One can never foresee when and in whom this Ketman will appear, which makes for an element of surprise. Individuals who give one every reason to suppose that they do not denounce others turn out to be inveterate informers. Individuals who are apparently most indifferent to prejudices show themselves inexplicably loyal toward their friends and even toward strangers. Since this Ketman augments the difficulties of controlling the citizens' thoughts, it is diligently sought out and penalized. Yet the number of situations to which it can be applied is so great that it often eludes all manner of pressure. The inhabitants of Western countries little realize that millions of their fellow men who seem superficially more or less similar to them live in a world as fantastic as the men from Mars. They are unaware of the perspectives on human nature that Ketman opens. Life in constant internal tension develops talents which are latent in man. He does not even suspect to what heights of cleverness and psychological perspicacity he can rise when he is cornered and must either be skillful or perish. The survival of those best adapted to mental acrobatics creates a human type that has been rare until now. The necessities which drive men to Ketman sharpen the intellect. Whoever would take the measure of intellectual life in the countries of Central or Eastern Europe from the monotonous articles appearing in the press or the stereotyped speeches pronounced there would be making a grave error. Just as theologians in periods of strict orthodoxy express their views in the rigorous language of the church, so the writers of the people's democracies make use of an accepted special style, terminology, and linguistic ritual. What is important is not what someone said, but what he wanted to say. Disguising his thoughts by removing a comma, inserting an and, establishing this rather than another sequence in the problems discussed. Unless one has lived there, one cannot know how many titanic battles are being fought, how the heroes of Ketman are falling, what this warfare is being waged over. Obviously, people caught up in this daily struggle are rather contemptuous of their compatriot political emigres. A surgeon cannot consider a butcher his equal in dexterity, just so a Pole, Czech, or Hungarian practiced in the art of dissimulation smiles when he learns that someone in the immigration has called him a traitor or a swine at the very moment when this traitor or swine is engaged in a match of philosophical chess on whose outcome the fate of 15 laboratories or 20 ateliers depends. They do not know how one pays. Those abroad do not know. They do not know what one buys and at what price. Ketman, as a social institution, is not entirely devoid of advantages. In order to evaluate them, one need only look at life in the West. Westerners, and especially Western intellectuals, suffer from a special variety of tedium vitae. Their emotional and intellectual life is too dispersed. Everything they think and feel evaporates like steam in an open expanse. Freedom is a burden to them. No conclusions they arrive at are binding. It may be so, then again, it may be not. The result is a constant uneasiness. The happiest of them seem to be those who become communists. They live within a wall which they batter themselves against, but which provides them with a resistance that helps them define themselves. Steam that once evaporated into the air becomes a force under pressure. An even greater energy is generated in those who must hide their communist convictions, that is, who must practice Ketman, a custom which is, after all, not unknown in the countries of the West. In short, Ketman means self-realization against something. He who practices Ketman suffers because of the obstacles he meets, but if these obstacles were suddenly to be removed, he would find himself in a void which might perhaps prove much more painful. Internal revolt is sometimes essential to spiritual health and can create a particular form of happiness. What can be said openly is often much less interesting than the emotional magic of defending one's private sanctuary. For most people, the necessity of living in constant tension and watchfulness is a torture, but many intellectuals accept this necessity with masochistic pleasure. He who practices Ketman lies, but would he be less dishonest if he could speak the truth? A painter who tries to smuggle illicit metaphysical delight into the beauty of the world, into his picture of life on a collective farm, would be lost if he were given complete freedom. For the beauty of the world seems greater to him the less free he is to depict it. A poet muses over what he would write if he were not bound by his political responsibilities, but could he realize his visions if he were at liberty to do so? Ketman brings comfort, fostering dreams of what might be, and even the enclosing fence affords the solace of reverie. Who knows whether It is not in man's lack of an internal core that the mysterious success of the new faith and its charm for the intellectual lie. By subjecting man to pressure, the new faith creates this core, or in any case, the feeling that it exists. Fear of freedom is nothing more than fear of the void. There is nothing in man, said a friend of mine, a dialectician. He will never extract anything out of himself because there is nothing there. You can't leave the people and write in a wilderness. Remember that man is a function of social forces. Whoever wants to be alone will perish. This is probably true, but I doubt if it can be called anything more than a law of our times. Feeling that there was nothing in him, Dante could not have written his Divine Comedy or Montaigne his essays, nor could Chardin have painted a single still life. Today, man believes that there is nothing in him, so he accepts anything, even if he knows it to be bad, in order to find himself at one with others, in order not to be alone. As long as he believes this, there is little one can reproach in his behavior. Perhaps it is better for him to breed a full-grown Ketman, to submit to pressure and thus feel that he is, than to take a chance on the wisdom of past ages, which maintains that man is a creature of God. But suppose one should try to live without Ketman, to challenge fate, to say, if I lose, I shall not pity myself. Suppose one can live without outside pressure. Suppose one can create one's own inner tension. Then it is not true that there is nothing in man. To take this risk would be an act of faith. Well, I'm going to leave it there. That's the end of the chapter on Ketman, and I'm going to leave the captive mind for now. So something to think about, how times repeat themselves, first time as a tragedy, second time as a comedy, or in a spiral of fates that repeat and just get more and more incestual and degraded as they come back around. I don't think Stalin would like to be compared to Donald Trump, probably an insult. Anyway, nice to talk to you all, and we will talk again soon. Thanks for joining.